My name is Russell. I love Jesus and I'm proud to be an Episcopalian. And I know the same is true for you. You would not be here if it was not true. So thank you. Thank you for the many ways that you live out the baptismal promises in your communities, which reach to over 30 counties of Northwest Florida and South Alabama that we know as the Central Gulf Coast. Thank you for giving your time to this time together as the 52nd convention of our diocese. And thank you for your continued trust in me as your bishop. I had an epiphany a few weeks ago. I was at the celebration of new ministry with the people of St. Mary's, Andalusia, and their new rector, Eric Mansell. And in that particular service, in that liturgy, there's a letter of institution that is kind of a formal declaration of the date and making it formal. And it goes like this: given under my hand and seal in the city of Andalusia, Alabama, on the 12th day of February in the year of our Lord 2023, in the 8th year of my ordination. And it stunned me. 8 years as your bishop. And given our last 3 years with COVID, there must be a multiplication factor for clergy life, kind of like a dog's life. I don't know who first said time flies when you're having fun, but I'm pretty sure they didn't live in the last 3 years. I do still have fun more days than I don't, but a lot that's happened recently to challenge that. Now, if you're getting anxious that this is a soft entry into an announcement about my future as your bishop, it is not. Thank you. A couple of y'all are going, darn. I am here, and God willing, and with your continued trust, I plan to be here. But that epiphany has made me curious about our future together. To be clear, I'm not worried about the future, but I do wonder about it. I wonder about the future, the fruit of our work. I wonder about the systems and structures of our diocese and the vitality and sustainability of your worshiping communities. Even more, I wonder about the Spirit of God and the signs of the Spirit's presence in our midst. So during our convention, I'm asking you to join together in some wondering about the Spirit and about our future. That's why we're mixing you up at these tables today. This kind of conversation can be risky. After all, there's a lot of Episcopalians in the room, and we get together like this. You are a spirited bunch. But I'm not the diocese. You are. I serve you. So if we want to wonder about the Spirit and our future, y'all are the ones to do it. So I hope that our time doing that within the business at hand, I hope it'll be enlightening, engaging, and some Spirit-inspired fun. But even as we spend some time to discuss the future, I'm well aware that the past is very near to many of us. This has been a poignant year for me. After we left last year's convention and the mountaintop experience with presiding Bishop Curry and Dr. Berry, I was diagnosed with COVID 3 days later. Then in June, there was the terrible shooting of 3 dear friends at St. Stephen's in Birmingham, where I served. That happened about the same time my mom entered into hospice care. And then in December, my mom's roommate, which is Robin's mom, died. And while she had been suffering with Alzheimer's for several years, it was that damn COVID that killed her. Thank you for your prayers. And on behalf of Robin, thank you for your prayers. COVID has become quite devious, hasn't it? While some suffer long-term medical issues of having COVID, all of us have been affected somehow by the trauma of the last 3 years. We live in a messy and mixed up time. Grief and trauma does that to people. It's still unknown how this will affect the future of our youth and children, but it has certainly affected our churches today. Some are ready for new ministry. Some are still standing in the rubble, and some have not yet returned. You can have a vestry with half of the people ready to move on and half are afraid to go on. Please continue to be gentle with each other and especially with your clergy. Tending to all these emotions and opinions in a church is harder now for your clergy than it has ever been. And since I'm speaking of the clergy, I want to speak to the clergy for just a minute. Thank you. I am so glad to hear that some of you are taking sabbaticals. I am so glad to hear when I know that you're on vacation. I am so glad to hear of your continuing education, and I urge you to take your continuing education, and I am deeply, deeply humbled to say that I'm proud of you. When we were together at Anthony's funeral, I had a really hard time holding it together when I walked into that room where all of you seemed to be there gathered. Your faith and grief and hope, it was palpable. St. Augustine said to his clergy in the 4th century, "For you I am a bishop, but with you I am a Christian. One is an office accepted, the other is a gift received." Thank you, and thanks be to God for you and the gift you are to us, and to your people and to me. Please do it. Each year, a lot of y'all don't know this, each year the clergy gather together to renew our ordination vows. This year we're doing it as a part of our convention. It's an experiment. It's motivated by a hunch that maybe y'all need and want to see us do this. And maybe the clergy want and need to see you. We are always much better when we are together. I think Paul said that. Please join me in giving thanks for our 3 host congregations. Usually we are hosted by one of our more resource congregations and often meet on their campus. But this year our hosts are 3 of our more average congregations from the Pensacola area: St. Cyprian's, Holy Trinity, and St. Monica's. They may think of themselves as small, but according to current statistics in the Episcopal Church, they're not as small as they think they are. The average Sunday attendance in an Episcopal church in this diocese is 51.5 people. Now, I'm not sure who out there qualifies for the 0.5. And let's remember that there is nowhere in the Gospels that Jesus asks about Sunday average attendance. In fact, he seems quite content to be gathered with 2 or 3. Holy Trinity, St. Cyprian's, and St. Monica's represent the majority of our worshiping communities. Of the 61 worshiping communities in our diocese, only 30 are served by a full-time rector. That means the other 31 worship with either part-time clergy, a supply priest, or a creative mix of clergy and lay leaders. The greatest joy of being your bishop is visiting these 61 congregations each year. To paraphrase Paul, there are a variety of ways to worship, and Lord, I see that all the time. But there is the same Spirit. There is not a Sunday that goes by that my heart is not warmed and my spirit is not renewed by you. I mean, it's amazing, to be amidst the energetic hustle and bustle of a Sunday at St. James in Fairhope on one Sunday, and then join in the lovely intimacy of 10 or so faithful people at St. Michael's in Ozark the next Sunday. One week I'm filled up by the music of John Rutter, sung masterfully by the choir in Nativity Dothan. The next week I'm swept up in the joyful sound of a soloist accompanied by a sound machine. And then the following week I'm stirred by the guitars at St. Monica's. And I'm so grateful to the choir of St. Monica's and to Fred to be able to show off and share their way of doing music at the convention. Thank you. Speaking of the Spirit, let's meet again our friend Nicodemus. By the way, you will meet him again on Sunday morning. I believe that Nicodemus is a good, sincere man who represents the best of the systems and structures of his religion. He's a Pharisee, a member of the ruling council, which means it's his job to settle theological issues and ecclesiastical questions. If there had been a diocesan convention back then, Nicodemus would have been in the crowd, if not sitting on the stage. And yet, for all his religion, something draws him, or maybe drives him, into the darkness to find this mysterious rabbi named Jesus. The novel titled Life After God by Douglas Coupland is set in the world of MTV, shopping malls, fast food, and unstable families where love and commitment seem impossible. But at the end of this novel, the speaker, seeing all the aimlessness and anxiety, has this insight. It's an insight that may very well have been on the heart of Nicodemus. Here is my secret. I tell it to you with an openness of heart that I doubt I shall ever achieve again, so I pray that you are in a quiet room as you hear these words. My secret is that I need God, that I am sick and no longer can make it alone. I need God to help me give because I no longer seem to be capable of giving, to help me be kind as I no longer seem capable of kindness, to help me love as I seem beyond being able to love. To make a long story short, Nicodemus gets more of God than he can ask or imagine. Be born again. Some of y'all start twitching. So, be born anew. Be born of the Spirit and keep watch for the Spirit at work in the world. And now here we are. The convention is canonically required of the 109 dioceses in the Episcopal Church, maybe it's 108, to tend to the systems and structures of our brand of religion. Structures and systems are a good thing. I am not interested in doing away with that. But I have been heard to say, and I'm saying it now to you, that I do wonder if for too long we have allowed the systems and structures to determine the Spirit's movement rather than allowing the Spirit to move us. It is that same Spirit that has moved us and guided us in the formation and expansion of our diocesan school for ministry. And there are many signs of the Spirit at work in the lives of our students and our graduates. On March 25th, we will ordain 6 people to the diaconate. 5 of those will be eventually be ordained priests. 4 of those were educated, trained, and formed in a residential seminary. 2 were trained in our school for ministry. And in our school right now, we have 6, I think, other postulants and candidates being formed for holy orders. Our school is not to replace traditional models, but it is our way of being open to the new ways to tend to the Spirit's call for raising up good and faithful clergy. And clergy leadership is not our only focus. Later today, you will hear Joy speak of the work of our school to raise up lay leaders for worship, preaching, and pastoral care, Christian education, evangelism. To repeat what I've said before, our 1979 Book of Common Prayer has been successful. It sought to reclaim the Holy Eucharist as the principal and normative Sunday worship service, and it's done that. But in 1979, I doubt anyone imagined that some 44 years later we would be struggling to find clergy to celebrate the Eucharist. And yet our people still hunger for the sacred meal. The lay leadership program in our diocese seeks to find intentional, faithful, and careful ways to form lay leaders to serve alongside of our clergy. We are all ministers. The more we share leadership at the table, in the pulpit, in the classrooms, and in our communities, the more vital and sustainable our congregations will be. I see signs of the Spirit moving among us and through us in other ways too. When I was in Andalusia, I spent some time between the morning service and the celebration that afternoon in their library. And somebody pointed out and reminded me that their library is, in fact, the nave of the original church that was moved from another location in town. Y'all ever tried that? Talk about Spirit moving things around. And even now, that same Spirit seems to be moving in some of our congregations that are daring to ask some very provocative questions about their buildings and location. We are leaning into similar questions regarding Murray House, an agency of this diocese since the 1990s. We must ask questions about our structures and systems and how those help or impede our mission as a church. And to trust that such movement and subsequent decisions hold the promise of new life and being born anew After all, we are resurrection people. Now, if that kind of stuff begins to stir up your anxiety, me too. But every time that happens, I want to point you to the sign of new life that I get to see every time I run into a former member of St. Matthew's Mobile. They were the people moved by the Spirit to declare to me in faith and hope that it was time for them to close. So we did. But before we closed the building, we spent some time trying to open the doors to new places for them to worship. As far as I can tell, just about every one of them 6 years later is worshiping as a part of another congregation in our diocese. That's pretty cool. One even serves on a vestry. These people are powerful signs to me of the Spirit at work. They are people who love their Lord and their church more than they love their building. And that love has ushered forth new life in them. Truly, they have been born anew. Here's another sign of the Spirit's presence among us. It has happened because of your generosity and trust. You'll hear some more about that in our financial report. For nearly 8 years, I have been giving voice to the goal and priority to call a full-time missioner for discernment, to give you the resources you need in your transitions, and to be a companion to our clergy in their transitions. I am thrilled to tell you that in the 8th year of my ordination, that dream has finally been realized because of your generosity. The Reverend Ashley Freeman hit the ground last summer, and in the first 7 months or so, he has helped 4 of our congregations call a new rector. And he's in the process of placing 5 about-to-be clergy. You will hear from him later today. Ashley, welcome home. And also, welcome to Annie and Mary Carmen. You know, we do meet up with Nicodemus again, right? We will see him once more in the light of day, standing up at a church meeting. Imagine that. And speaking of justice for this Jesus. John 7. Then again, we will find Nicodemus in the chaos and despair of death at the cross. While the disciples of Jesus are locked up in their fear, Nicodemus is out in the light. You see, I think one important sign of the Spirit's presence in our midst is when we get out of our churches into the light. It's found when and where and how we show up, stand up, speak out, and tend to the injury, injustice, and despair of this world. We are called to be involved with this world and everyone in it. COVID put quite a damper on that for our diocese, but even now the wind is beginning to blow once more. I think it's this morning. If not today, tomorrow. 14 people representing our diocese are flying down to our companion diocese for the first time in about 4 years to build furniture in churches with our companion diocese, the Dominican Republic. Earlier this year, a group of people made a trip to the Mexican border to rekindle our relationship with the Diocese of the Rio Grande and their ministry to refugees. Our deacon John Kendall has worked tirelessly to breathe life and open a way back to the men of St. Dismas, an Episcopal mission in Fountain Prison near Atmore that was locked up because of COVID. Deacon Clelia Garrity, who I assigned a new title, the Missioner of Global Refuge Ministries for our diocese, is beginning to network our people with places like the Mexican border, Zambia, Ukraine, and our local communities. All of this is to say that the Spirit is still at work in our midst. I see it in you. Your work is not in vain, though sometimes it may feel as if it is. Still, while the Spirit is at work, let's name and heed a stumbling block we hear in Nicodemus. It's one that's sometimes here in our churches when Jesus makes excuses. Well, Jesus, okay, but I'm too old. What do I do? I know that we want young families. I hear it just about every Sunday. But let's not dismiss the people who are coming to us. I was a youth minister before I was a priest. And the energy and intensity and joy of ministering with teenagers still inspires me. I love confirming teenagers as they claim Jesus as their Lord for the first time in their life. But for all that, it is the 80-plus-year-olds that I lay my hands on their head and pray for that often moves me to tears. I know that being born again is real because I get to see it. I get to see it happen in the young and in the not so young. So let's be mindful of who is showing up. And let's be mindful of our hesitation, questions, and excuses, and let's try not to let them get the best of us. After all, God does not seem to consider age as a restriction for ministry. On Sunday morning, you will also hear the story of Abraham and Sarah, who were in their mid-70s when God called them to pack up and go forth. As I wrap this up, I told you about my epiphany in Andalusia, but I also saw a sign in that service that gives me great hope. I looked out, and near the back of the church, there was this young woman just smiling. Her name is Mia. She's 15 now. When I first met her, she was 8. Some of you don't know her as Mia, but you know her as the girl in the blue dress, who I sometimes tell her story. Mia was the little girl who I met in the narthex before a service, as we were all lined up, ready to go, dressed up to play our parts, clergy, choir, acolytes. Right smack in the middle of it all, sitting quietly in a chair, was this little girl in a blue dress. She sat with a gospel book propped in her lap. Hi, my name's Russell. I'm the bishop. Hi. She was not impressed that I was a bishop. So who are you? I asked. And she replied, I am the gospel. Talk about being trumped. It was the custom for a child at that time to carry the gospel book. She wasn't just carrying the gospel book, she was the gospel. I am the gospel. She said it with such conviction that I kind of believed her. She's right. And nearly 8 years later, there she was, all grown up, and still the gospel. Y'all, time does fly. And we cannot turn back time, and we should not try. So let's not waste the time given to us, but use our time to be the gospel, the living signs of the Spirit of God in this world. We are the story, right? We are the story. We are the song. We are the gospel. And I look forward to living many more stories with you, and even trying to learn a new song with you too.